Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie The Lover 1992, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. In the humid dawn of Saigon, the first rays of a tropical sun slip through mosquito-netted windows, stirring a languid haze that drapes over a young girl's slumbering form. She lies on a simple mattress, her skin the pale porcelain of porcelain apples under the cool cotton sheet. Outside, the city hums to life, rickshaws rattling over cobblestones, vendors calling out their wares, and the distant rumble of motorbikes weaving through traffic. Inside, she drifts in a meditative stillness, poised at the threshold of an awakening that will forever fracture her innocence. At 17, she moves through afternoons of disciplined schooling and evenings of half-whispered dreams. Her family, strapped by poverty and propriety, lives in a modest home that creaks under colonial architecture, a remnant of French Indochina. While Saigon anchors her to rhythms of survival and duty, her heart drifts like a red lotus petal on a still lagoon, yearning for a world that stretches far beyond the boundaries of class and custom. Our journey begins with her as she commutes each day in gentle dissonance. 7 siblings crowd the midday table. She lingers, teasing the rim of her bowl of rice before leaving for lessons. On the riverbank, where the water smells of earth and merchandising, she pauses to cool her feet in mud-slick shallows. She watches children play and fishermen haul their nets, mistaking it for a simple scene of everyday ruin, but in her chest, a flicker of something like wonder leaps to life. Among the throng he stands, a man whose presence cuts across color and chaos, his skin the tawny shade of teakwood, his linen shirt the muted beige of dust. He's a wealthy businessman, on his way back from a meeting with French expatriates, and he's rumored to own rubber plantations that ripple through the Mekong Delta. His age has etched lines by his eyes, but his gaze remains sharp, like a hunter listening to the forest for telltale rustles. When she glances up, their eyes lock for an instant that feels like an eternity. In that flash, the river's gentle lull recedes, and her world tilts on a new axis, the axis of desire. It is not courtship in any conventional sense. Their first conversation is a breathless exchange of compliments, polite yet charged beneath the dappled light of tamarind trees. He congratulates her on her command of the English language and offers her coins for her family's living expenses. She shakes her head. Honor guides her. She bows, but in her eyes, he catches a spark that speaks beyond the currency of courtesy. She returns his polite, severe bow without knowing that, in his heart, a cradle of tenderness has unfurled. As seasons unfurl over Saigon, monsoons drumming against tin roofs, incense coiling toward heaven, these two souls circle one another with careful restraint. Beneath the weight of their social disparity, they share a furtive intimacy, warm glances that dance just beyond detection, and letters folded into pockets like secret prayers. Every meeting is an act of defiance, against custom, against family, and against the young woman's need to remain protected. She recognizes early that to cross this threshold is to cast herself into a pool without a bottom. There is no turning back once she surrenders. Her parents, pillars rooted in tradition, sense change in shadows. Their matriarch, a woman of few smiles and firm hands, watches the way her daughter's gaze lingers on the stranger across the market square. Their patriarch confesses to neighbors that he fears her soul may slip away on a current she cannot navigate. Yet she slips through their watchful eyes, stepping each afternoon to meet him under the shade of banyan trees where sunlight fractures into a million glinting shards. They exchange stories of far-off cities, Paris, London, a world built of elegant boulevards and lamp-lit cafes. She listens breathlessly as he speaks of jazz orchestras and porcelain cups of coffee, and though only 1 foot of her remains in Saigon, the rest of her heart drifts across oceans. Each stolen moment amid the threadbare elegance of a colonial veranda cements their bond, fragile as a gossamer wing, but fierce enough to scorch the air. When they touch hands, the sheerness of her school uniform is replaced by humidity that seems to ignite their skin. The narrative weaves through scenes of her family's daily struggle. Rice boiled thinly enough to stretch over 8 mouths, headlamps flickering as her father mends rubber boots while her mother plucks chicken feathers by lamplight. Through this, she moves with a secret luminosity, because she carries in her heart the knowledge of another world. The disparity of their station becomes starkly clear when she finds herself at his home, a sprawling villa where teakwood floors gleam under the glow of crystal chandeliers, and a courtyard fountain sings with marble finches. Indoors, the aroma of bergamot tea mingles with polished lacquer, and every corner holds globes of light that burn like dutiful sentinels. He offers her a glass of ice water, and the first coolness on her lips feels like an ocean sigh against her tongue. She stands in the threshold, her plain cotton dress a faint ripple of humility in that ornate sea. He watches her, shifting from the measured poise of a suitor to the vulnerable sway of a man opening his world to a dream. Yet behind every gesture of generosity lies the husk of colonial politics, a shadow that threads its way through their moments of fragile joy. He must navigate the expectations of French associates who view him as a princeling of local wealth, a prince whose existence merely validates the colonial structure that both alienates and confounds him. Their whispers drift through his smooth morning conversations. They reassure him of his position as the exotic. They press him at dinner tables, speaking in a French heavy with condescension, unaware that their very words hinge his soul. The woman at his side glides through these gatherings with polite obeisance, but her eyes betray a solidarity deeper than any language he or his European counterparts could conjure. In their rare conversations, they speak of belonging, of the absurdity in defining a person by the color of their money, rather than the weight of their heart. Each secret touch between them becomes an allegiance against a world that wishes to fence them into silences of race and creed. Her family's sense of color and class gnaws at the margin of her mind, tugging her to a precipice she fears she may topple from. Each evening, her grandmother recites passages from the Confucian texts by lamplight, words that insist a daughter's duty is to safeguard her lineage's honor above her foolish whims. Her mother, fingers stained by chili oil, reminds her that love is a luxury for those whose bellies are not empty. Yet love insists on blossoming in the loose garden of heartbreak and yearning, and though she absorbs their critiques with head bent low, her heart quivers with defiance. The man offers her gifts of fine French silk, a scarf soft enough to feel like memory against her throat, and she stows them away in the narrow trunk she keeps hidden under her bed. Each piece of silk is a promise unspoken, a ribbon of solidarity across the boundary of social expectation. He offers a strand of pearls, say, Angie, you are more precious than all the world's treasures. In her eyes, he sees the reflection of a world that might yet be rewritten. Their clandestine love surges to its crescendo on a sultry summer evening when a family trip to the Mekong invites the first crack in their fragile world. Amidst the droning of dragonflies and the hush of river reeds, she slips away to meet him on a deserted pier. The full moon blots out the night's darkness, its reflection shimmering like molten silver on the water. He waits, tapping a cigarette against his palm, the glow half hidden beneath the brim of his fedora. She steps toward him, her bare feet slipping on the wooden boards, and in that moment of luminous urgency, they seal their bond with a kiss so fervent their souls tremble in tandem. For a heartbeat, they stand outside the flow of time, a tableau of love radiant enough to blind any doubting eye. Yet their embrace is cut short by the swift approach of her brother's voice, harsh, accusing, dragging her back like a flake of ice slipping from a ledge. The moment shatters as though stained glass struck by a pebble, a promise torn and scattered. From that rupture, the story accelerates toward its most pivotal twist. She is ordered home by her family, told she must abide by a marriage arrangement tailored to cement social ties and restore honor. She kneels before her grandparents in a ceremony thick with incense, answering ritual questions that echo as if in a mausoleum. Though each word of the vow separates her from her love, each syllable is a cord twisting her heart tighter. She returns to the city, still beautiful, still alive, still buzzing with the pulse of traders and schoolchildren, but her eyes are dimmed by the weight of absent hands. He waits for her beneath the same banyan tree where they first spoke, and when he hears of her engagement, his face contorts with a sorrow so deep that the world seems to cleave in half. He gestures as though to follow her to the gates of her new home, to plead his case before ancient ancestors, but he hesitates, knowing the power that wealth and color wield in a world built on an unequal scale. Instead, he watches her carriage vanish down the street, leaving behind the scent of sandalwood and unspoken farewells. In the twilight that follows, he knows that to follow would be to desecrate her family's honor. To stay is to condemn them both to memory's ghost. Time threads itself forward, weaving gold with grief as the years pass. She marries a suitable suitor, one whose pockets are deep, whose lineage is unblemished, and whose embrace offers security at the cost of her soul. The hush of colonial Saigon gives way to the charged tension of an uncertain Vietnam, and the world around them convulses under the weight of uprisings and uncertainty. Though miles apart, their hearts remain tethered by red threads knotted in fire. When he travels to Saigon once more, a successful plantation owner whose charm has ripened into quiet melancholy, she meets him in a dimly lit café, lights dimmed to hide furtive glances. They speak in whispers that drift like smoke between them, words soaked in regret and longing. In his hand, he holds another strand of pearls, this one limp with age, its nacre scratched by the passage of time. He offers them to her as though offering his own heart. I have kept these because they remind me that there was once a world where you were mine. In her eyes, he sees the flicker of what might have been, a reflection of parallel lives that converge only in half-remembered epiphanies. Their final meeting unfolds by the banks of the Saigon River at dusk, where the water reflects the sky's bruised pink and violet, as though the world itself is suspended between sorrow and hope. The hush of passing sampans, boats drifting like black ghosts, underscores each word they exchange. She reveals that she has ran now, two beautiful girls whose laughter lingers in her home like sunshine on dusty wood floors. Her marriage offers comforts and constraints, a gilded cage whose bars she can neither escape nor fully embrace. He confesses that his plantations have prospered, yet his richest fields lay barren in his heart. As they touch fingers, the electricity in their clasp ignites a memory too raw to recapture. Then, as though haunted by ancestral duty, she lets go, stepping away into the gathering shadows. He watches her retreat until only her silhouette remains, and then turns to walk down the riverbank alone, her presence carved into his soul in ways that no wealth or time can erase. In that final flicker, the film's heart pulses. Love is a force that demands sacrifice, a tide that cannot be resisted, and a flame that neither time nor custom can fully extinguish. In a final scene, years later, the camera transports us to a modern-day Saigon, where neon lights pulse along boulevards crusted with rain-wet asphalt. She, now a woman whose hair carries the salt of many seasons, moves through the crowd with the measured grace of someone who has learned to walk under the moon with only memories for company. A passerby bumps her shoulder, and she steadies herself, glimpsing the ghost of that young man's face in a passerby's sun-creased smile. In that fleeting moment, a rush of all she never had washes over her. Youth's promise, love's crash, and the solitude of a heart that knows both desire and duty. She closes her eyes, letting the city's pulse become her own. Though the world around her spins in neon and noise, she stands still, grounded by the essence of choices made at the edge of innocence. From the hush before dawn to the roar of modernity, her journey reveals that love's echo lingers in the lingering curve of a smile, in the bittersweet pulse of a memory that shapes all the days that follow. Thus unfolds our story, a tapestry woven from moments where hearts dance on a knife edge between devotion and obligation. Across every sultry afternoon and moonlit rendezvous, the tapestry threads together fear and longing, sacrifice and redemption, until the final image, of her standing alone against the pulse of a changed city, shimmers with the bittersweet glow of all that is lost and all that endures. In this tale of fevered passion, social chasm, and irrevocable choices, we see the heart's capacity to transcend every barrier, even as it learns that, in the end, some sacrifices leave scars that neither time nor forgiveness can ever wholly erase. In the simmering haze of a late summer afternoon, the viewer first glimpses her slender figure weaving through the crowded streets of Saigon, the sun casting her shadow long upon the dusty pavement. At 17, she moves with cautious poise, her eyes bright with a mix of curiosity and the silent ache of adolescence. Clad in a simple white blouse and a crisp blue skirt that sways with every measured step, she carries the faint nimbus of youthful reserve, part schoolgirl, part dreamer lost in her own burgeoning world. The dusty clamor of the neighborhood seems to recede wherever she goes, as though her presence commands a hush that eclipses the chatter of rickshaws and street vendors hawking sweet mangoes and sun-baked bananas. To those who know her, she is but one daughter among 7, the second-born in a family that scrapes by on the edge of respectability and poverty. But to the audience, she is already more, a prism of innocence and longing, poised on the cusp of a shimmering, dangerous awakening. Her mornings begin before dawn, when the narrow lanes of her family's cramped home lurch with the muted rustle of blankets being shoved aside. The call of the city's muezzin drifts through open windows, weaving into the incense that curls from a small porcelain altar where her mother, silent and stern, offers prayers to ancestors whose portraits line the walls. In that dim glow, the girl tiptoes to the rice pot, ladling out grain thick with a thin smear of oil to fuel her siblings for the rigors of a new day. Before she takes her first bite, she catches a fleeting glimpse of her mother's lined face in the mirror, eyes tired yet resolute, a silent reminder that duty shapes every breath she draws. She dresses quickly, pressing her blouse's starched collar against her neck, and steps into the sticky morning air, where vendors already hawk fougasse and jasmine tea. Her brother, 2 years her senior and clad in the uniform of the French lycée, greets her with a perfunctory nod, eyes flicking to the battered school satchel slung over her shoulder. She offers a tentative smile before slipping into a crowded tram, her thoughts already straining toward a single rendezvous that simmers in the back of her mind. School days blur into a parade of French, mathematics, and history, each lesson recited in hushed tones beneath the shadow of colonial aspirations. She sits in the second row, clutching a well-worn English grammar book, her attention half captured by the chalk dust swirl dancing in a single shaft of sunlight. In the adjoining classroom, a group of French girls whisper behind fans, their laughter tinkling like delicate glass, but she remains apart, neither fully French nor fully Vietnamese, an orphan soul adrift in a colonial tide. Her teachers glance at her slender form with a mixture of impatience and reluctant respect. She grasps languages with an ease that belies her impoverished background, her accent a curious marriage of Parisian drawl and Saigon lilt. Yet her eyes betray a restlessness, as though the words on the blackboard could never encompass the landscape that murmurs within her, one woven of silk, riverboats, and the hush of a secret she has yet to name. That secret lies in her dreams of escape, dreams that bloom as she gathers her belongings at dusk, leaving behind textbooks and the smell of chalk for the humid twilight that suffuses the city. She navigates the winding lanes to the riverbank, where families cluster under lantern-lit awnings, feasting on hot bowls of pho as sampans drift by, loaded with cargo and cabins singing folk melodies. The river stretches like a molten ribbon beneath a tangerine sky, its surface rippling with the passage of French steamers and wooden junks. Tonight, she has arranged to meet him whose presence has become an undercurrent of thrill and fear, whose very name pulses within her like a secret heartbeat. Their first meeting is a dance of timing and restraint. She tucks a strand of black hair behind her ear as she steps onto the peeling wooden platform, skirts whispering against the planks. His silhouette looms near the river's edge, tall, lithe, dressed in crisp linen that clings to strong shoulders. He stands apart from the throng, cigarette held lightly between 2 fingers as he gazes toward the east, where the sun's last glow leans against the rippling waves. When he catches sight of her, his expression splits into a hesitant, almost shy smile, an incongruity for a man rumored to command fortunes in rubber and French luxury. She hesitates for half a heartbeat, wrestling with propriety and desire, and then steps forward until only the river's breath separates them. In that moment, the world around her hushes, the clang of a sampan's or the licit aroma of grilled shrimp and the far-off clatter of motorbikes all fade into a single thudding pulse. When he greets her in faltering French, each syllable shaping his desire into fragile bonds, she feels the river's current in her ribs, as though fate itself flows through her veins. He offers her a silk scarf, burnt orange, so soft it resembles a whisper, promising that it comes from Paris and has brushed the shoulders of women who move through salons like liquid gold. When he gently drapes it around her neck, The weft of the silk sends a shiver down her spine. The fabric clings to her skin, a warm promise of something radiant and new. Her breath catches as she traces the scarf's embroidered edge with her fingers, and he stands close enough for their breaths to mingle in the humid air. In that near embrace, they stand precariously on the precipice of all that matters, a gulf of class that could devour them whole and an ardor too urgent to be contained by any boundary. He tells her they cannot tarry long. His French companions await him at a grand hotel on the other side of town, but in that single moment time loosens its hold. She lifts her eyes to his, and in that gaze she glimpses a world where her heart might fracture and, at once, find wings. As the days unfurl, their secret rendezvous burgeon into furtive rituals that color every corner of her existence. At first, it is the stolen glances exchanged across crowded café tables, a fleeting touch of fingertips under a linen tablecloth, each contact as electrifying as a thunderclap. Their words remain soft whisperings, linguistic dances veiled by laughter and the clink of porcelain cups. She learns to navigate the labyrinth of narrow alleys and hidden stairwells that lead to his car, a sleek Peugeot that gleams like a shard of moonlight. In its back seat, they sit unable to speak, the engine's hum suffusing the space with a hush that thrums between them. When he finally cups her face and draws her close, the world beyond the windows dissolves. No longer a city of colonial lights and economic divides, but a realm where only their breath and the steady thrum of desire exist. Their meetings grow bolder. He takes her to the river once more, but this time to a small sampan rocked by a terse oarsman who says nothing while he maneuvers them through jade waters. They drift past wooden stilt houses, their reflections shimmering like elongated ghosts in the lamplit designs. Crickets trill in reeds that hem the shore, and occasionally, distant cannon fire thunders across the Mekong as colonial forces patrol upriver. Though the danger pulses just beyond the horizon, within the sampan's dim glow they carve a sanctuary. He offers whispered tales of Paris, ballrooms aglow with crystal chandeliers, cafés draped in afternoon chatter, and a sky salted with starlight. Each word he speaks paints a portrait of a world she has never touched, yet already feels coursing through her bones. In eclipse of civility, they touch lips, his warm and insistent, hers soft and yielding, and the river takes note, its surface rippling as though applauding their union. Her family's watchful eyes flicker like distant candles in the night. Rumors drift home before her. Neighbors speak in hushed voices of a wealthy bachelor seen always with a young girl. Her brothers, martial and dutiful, glance warily at her whenever she enters the house, their jaws clenched against suspicions they cannot name. In the family's cramped dining room, the lantern's glow illuminates her mother's pinched face as she examines her daughter's hands for signs of lipstick stains or hidden letters. Perhaps she senses the curve of her daughter's mouth, once untroubled, now shadowed by a destiny her parents cannot comprehend. Yet the girl manages to keep her secret tucked close like a fragile blossom. In the eye of her parents' concern, she masters the art of passing unremarked, quiet at dinner, diligent in her studies, and always home by curfew. Still, when the moon rises and the city's sirens quiet, she slips away again, drawn as though by a force more primal than fear, a force that courses through her blood. His visits become more elaborate. He secures a room in a silent, upscale hotel whose windows frame the sprawling city below. The moment she enters, she feels as though she has stepped into a place not bound by poverty or modesty, but by the luxury of possibilities. Thick velvet drapes hang from brass rods, isolating them from the world's chaos. A crystal chandelier shimmers overhead, its prisms scattering light across a polished marble floor. He orders food, juicy grapes, slices of foie gras, and a bottle of pale white wine that tastes like the ocean's memory. With each sip, she feels her heart's cadence quicken. With each bite, her senses bloom. They dine in low voices, their eyes darting between bites, as though the very act of eating feels like a transgression in a world that demands caution. When she finally perks her head and he wraps an arm around her waist, the chandelier's glow seems to flicker, a silent witness to a moment that is both precious and precarious. As days drift into weeks, the film's lens glides over their love like a hummingbird's wings over a jasmine blossom. He brings her silk from Paris, a gown that drapes her body like a second skin, whispering against her limbs with the faintly perfumed softness of petals. When she slips into that gown, her reflection in the mirror betrays a hunger in her eyes she had never recognized before. Standing across from him, she feels the world's compass tilt. She realizes he sees in her not the daughter of a poor family, but a woman whose spirit could rival any star. They dance in that hotel room to a phonograph's crackling strains, his hand steady at her waist, hers drifting to his shoulder, each step an expression of a love that hums beneath the surface of their secret. As the record scratches to its end, they embrace, and in that embrace, she feels the fullness of life beyond the cotton-draped rooms of her home. Yet threads of dissonance begin to fray their tapestry. Whispers ripple through social circles. A wealthy bachelor should not be seen with a mere schoolgirl. His French friends in the ballroom lounge regard him with veiled disdain, their raised brows invoking a world that does not countenance such affairs. He deflects their jests with a faint, half-hearted laugh, but behind his eyes a shadow flickers. He knows anything they discover could cost him not just reputation, but the fragile cocoon he has built with her. Still, he cannot deny the pull she exerts upon him, as though her soul shines so brightly that every star in the colonial sky pales in comparison. She, for her part, feels the tension coil within her every time she hears the word propriety spoken in her home's parlor. Her grandmother's prayers, once a soothing ritual, now feel like shackles clipped around her heart, a reminder that her choices carry the weight of honor and disgrace. Their secret finds itself threatened when her aunt, traveling on business, glimpses her disembarking from the Peugeot at dusk, the silk gown glinting in the lampost's yellow light. Lipped pursed, her aunt returns home in a fever of concern, and soon the matriarchs convene under the ornate silk canopy of ancestral portraits. Whispers of an illicit engagement flutter like moths in their minds, setting ablaze a fear that the family's name will be besmirched. They send her to the neighborhood market, framed by shutters awakening at dawn, bound to return home with sacks of provisions for the week. But rumor dogs her, and as she steps from the tram, she senses eyes on her, accusation perched upon hidden lips. The vendors regard her with cautious applause, noting the faint sparkle of gold earrings that hint at wealth she should not possess. In that moment, the world tilts and she fears that every glance is a hammer forging her fate. She steels herself, balancing rice sacks on her arm as though they will conceal her truth, and moves quickly down the lane, each step a testament to her newfound resolve. Yet love's gravity pulls her back to him. On a humid dusk, the horizon a blistered scar of orange and purple, they meet at the fringes of a pagoda, its pillars carved with dragons that seem to shift beneath incense-laden air. Neither says a word at first. The hum of cicadas and distant temple bells do the speaking. He presses her hand and finds the silk scarf pinned inside her blouse, its soft threads tangled with a promise that still hums between them. She looks at him, tears glinting in the restless twilight, and whispers that she cannot continue without facing the storm that rises behind her. He nods, his chest tightening, knowing that they stand at the nexus of love and obligation. In the hush of that moment, the dragon carvings seem to flex, as though the temple itself holds its breath in anticipation. They draw closer, foreheads touching, and share a kiss so fierce it silences the world. But within that silent rapture, they both sense a rumble, a tremor of consequences that will shatter the delicate glass they have held between them. That night, under a sweep of moonlight that pools on her bedroom floor, she wrestles with a silent monologue that feels like a battlefield in her heart. How can she betray the family that has cradled her from infancy, bound her to its legacy? Yet how can she deny the fire kindled within her, a blaze too intense to be smothered by any duty? The silk gown hangs from a single nail on the wall, its folds shimmering like the promise of 1,000 unspoken words. She unfolds it with trembling fingers and wonders whether it will serve as her armor or her undoing. Outside, the city breathes, a living organism of light and desire, and inside, she utters a vow so soft that even her shadows hold their breath. She will not betray love for comfort, nor comfort for love. In that vow, she steps into an irrevocable world of choices, each one a sharp-edged blade that can carve her destiny in sorrow's ink or joy's resplendent color. When the sun breaks over Saigon's horizon the next day, she rises with a determination that hums through her bones. She writes him a letter, a thing of silken stationery scented with jasmine, pouring out her heart in French, English, and her native tongue, weaving words that entwine hope with fear. She prays for his understanding even as she signs her name with a deliberate finality. Then she folds the letter and tucks it inside the folds of the silk scarf, pressing the bundle to her chest as she steps into the tram for school. Her eyes burn with tears unshed, and when she glances at her reflection in the window, she sees a young woman whose innocence has slipped through her fingers like water. For the first time, she understands that love demands courage, a courage measured not in brash declarations but in the soft, resolute hush that blooms beneath her ribs with the dawn of new resolve. And so, their story pauses at this crossroads of longing and destiny, two souls bound by silk and secret, caught between the world they inhabit and the world they yearn to create. In the hush of that morning, with the city awakening to its own cluttered chant, we feel the tremor of what is to come, the collision of duty and desire, the shatter of expectations, and the delicate forging of hearts brave enough to redefine themselves beneath the sun's fierce gaze. In that moment, the narrative stands poised, a pen held suspended above parchment, waiting to trace its next line in ink that will yet taste of both tears and triumph. And as the tram rattles through the waking streets, each clack of its wheels becomes a pulse, singing of what waits beyond the horizon's incandescent blur. As summer's fierce drape yielded to the softer glow of early autumn, she found herself relinquishing the stolen hours by the river for the rigid confines of her new school in Saigon. Each morning, she climbed into the tramcar's claustrophobic bustle, clutching her textbooks as though they were an armor against desire's still-burning embers. The city's humid breath pressed in on her, vendors hawking roasted peanuts, street children darting like minnows between rickshaws, and yet her mind drifted to him, to the faint, dusty trace of his linen coat clinging to her senses. In the classroom, her French teacher droned on about colonial geography, but her thoughts always looped back to that final summer dusk on the pagoda's terrace, when they'd tasted a trespass so fervent that even silence had felt luxurious. Now, as she recited verb conjugations, she felt that silence pressing in on all sides, as though the world had drawn a neat line between who she'd been and who she would never cease becoming. He had vanished from her daily life with a polite bow, offered one humid morning before dawn's first light, his eyes brimming with a sorrow he refused to voice. Instead, he whispered that he must journey north to Canton, where his family compelled him to arrange a marriage that would secure their plantations along the Pearl River Delta. He said he would write, as though ink could bridge oceans of convention. When she watched his silhouette recede down the jetty, each step he took seemed to drag a cord of longing through her chest, leaving her standing on that same wooden plank as though she had foundered on some unmapped edge of grief. In the weeks that followed, letters arrived folded neatly in pale-stained envelopes, perfumed with the faint, wistful scent of ink and his own distant musk. Each word he penned felt like an electric current coursing through her veins. He spoke of Canton's jade-hued canals, the hush of marketplaces beneath paper lanterns, and the gilded banquet halls where silk-robed cousins awaited his news. In these letters he was a distant echo of himself, no longer the fervent presence by the river-bank, but a scholar tethered to tradition and filial duty. She read and reread his correspondence beneath the rattan ceiling of her classroom, unable to focus on Latin declensions or algebraic formulas, as though each lesson only deepened the fissure of his absence. By mid-September, the monsoon rains had begun to pelt the city with the rhythmic insistence of 1,000 tiny drums. She would rise before dawn to collect water for her family's breakfast and see the world washed clean in gray-green torrents, draping rooftops like veils. Each drop of rain felt like a gathering of her own tears, as though the sky itself mirrored the ache deep in her ribs. She accepted his letters like sacred talismans, tucking them beneath her pillow at night, afraid that daylight might steal their magic. In the hush of another rain-soaked evening, she discovered a budding tenderness within herself toward a young man in her class, a fellow student whose tidy uniform and gentle smile framed a kindness she had never noticed before. His name was Min, and he carried a sense of safety she found both appealing and shameful. He offered her pages borrowed from his textbook when hers was festooned with faint coffee rings. When she saw him craning his neck to glimpse her notes, she felt a flutter in her chest, as though possibility hovered near her like a moth's tentative wing beat. One afternoon, when she lingered by the school's crumbling fountain, lost in the echo of his absence, Min appeared at her side with a bowl of mangoes dripping golden juice. He held out the fruit with a shy grin, sunlight fracturing through the clotted clouds to catch each bead of juice like liquid amber. For a moment, she tasted sweetness on her tongue and almost forgot the taste of him. But as her teeth sank into the mango's yielding flesh, she felt her heart split in two. Part of her reached for the simple safety he offered, and the other part remained tethered to that riverbank under banyan trees, where her soul first learned desire. It was in that fracture between longing and propriety that she discovered she was pregnant, an understanding so sudden and thunderous that her world seemed to compress into a single breathless gasp. The evening she found herself staring at the tiny line in the porcelain cup, she staggered to her bedroom as though a ghost had taken her place. The rain beat against her window-panes so hard it felt like the earth was hammering at her chest, echoing the pounding of her own heart. She thought of his letters, those fragile promises folded into warm paper, wondering if he would understand, if any words could encompass the chasm that yawned between them. She sank onto the edge of her bed, tears marking trails upon her cheeks as she pressed her hand against her stomach, shocked by the impossible weight of what she had carried. For days, she wandered through her life like a spectre, attending classes, helping at the market, folding laundry, each task robotic, as though her body betrayed her, forging a path to a future she could hardly name. Min noticed her pallor, her newfound silence. One afternoon, he cornered her by the school's fractured fountain, voice hushed even as he broke the hush of approaching rains. "You are not yourself, Lean," he murmured, his dark eyes kindled with concern. She shook her head, heart clanging like a distant bell, uncertain whether she could bear to speak the words that perched on her tongue. His hand brushed hers, warm against clammy skin, and she felt a flicker, an ember of something raw and vulnerable. He offered to help in any way he could, but she withdrew, her voice a scant whisper that dissolved in the moist air. "It is not your burden, Min." When she fled, he watched her retreat until she vanished beneath the curtain of rain, leaving him with the weight of unspoken truths and a sorrow he could neither name nor quell. Family life, too, began to unravel. Her mother, once a pillar of stoic resolve, grew suspicious as she watched her daughter's face betray a tired sorrow beyond the normal strains of schoolwork. In the kitchen at dusk, her mother caught her lingering over a journal, pages stained with ink sketches of a man's face etched in memories. She seized the book, demanding answers with a voice sharper than the cleaver she used to chop vegetables. Under the low glow of a single bulb, her family gathered, her siblings' widening eyes shining like startled fireflies, her father's stern gaze lined with confusion. She stood trembling, unable to slice through the knotted mass of fear and longing that lodged itself in her throat. Finally, she whispered the truth, fragmented, trembling whispers that spilled from her like broken shards. She stood trembling, unable to slice through the knotted mass of fear and longing that lodged itself in her throat. Finally, she whispered the truth, fragmented, trembling whispers that spilled from her like broken shards, admitting she had been with a man far older, a wealthy foreigner whose family compelled him to marriage, and that she now carried his child. The room collapsed into chaos. Her mother's cries of shame, her brother's lashing out with angry questions, and her father's dark fury that seemed to rend the air. When her father's hand closed around her arm in a grip that shook her very bones, she felt a fracture divide her forever, the moment a daughter must stand alone before her world crumbled. That night, beneath the watchful silence of ancestral portraits, her mother made a choice that felt like the final unraveling of her childhood. She and her father arranged for her to visit a doctor in the city, a physician known only as Madame Hoa, who operated in a discreet, candlelit chamber. At dawn, they escorted her through winding streets, past shuttered shop-fronts and slumbering carts, until they reached a nondescript door bathed in a flickering yellow glow. Behind that door, they led her into a room where Madame Hoa waited, her face a mask of professional calm. The moment her father's hand slipped from her arm, She felt her life narrow to the soft smell of heated oil and the echo of water dripping somewhere beneath tiled floors. The moment she saw that man's deliberate kindness, the way he offered her a cup of warm tea and a faint, empathetic smile, she felt her heart splinter again, caught between relief at his gentleness and dread for what must come. When he laid his hands upon her, she gripped the edge of the examination table like a lifeline, bracing herself against a pain that felt more like heartbreak than anything her body alone could endure. The procedure, if one could call it that, stretched on in a haze of muted lights and antiseptic smells. Between wavelets of discomfort, she felt waves of shame and regret wash over her. Shame for her folly, regret that the man she loved was so far beyond the reach of her trembling arms. He did not speak harsh words. Instead, he held her hand through each contraction of agony, muttering assurances that he would make things right. But she knew that no comfort could mend the rift between her and her lover. Even as her body shuddered with the pain that erased all traces of new life, her soul ached for a future that could never be. When at last the pain receded, replaced by a hollow emptiness, she lay on the table, tears seeping into the pillow, and grasped the edge of his sleeve as though she would drown if he slipped away. He brushed her hair from her forehead, brushing away each wet strand with a gentleness that shredded her heart anew. He knelt by her, whispering regret and pride, but she could only close her eyes against the welling storm in her chest, knowing that this moment had sealed her fate. She would never fully escape the burden of that night, an indelible stain upon her soul that would echo through every whispered breeze and every sigh of the river. Weeks drifted on, and she returned to school with head held high, each step a testament to her resolve to conceal the hollow ache beneath practiced composure. But in the hush of the trams and the classrooms, she found herself haunted by the echo of his absence. How his letters had dwindled, replaced by a pale silence that gnawed at her marrow. One day, she received a letter not addressed to her but slipped between the pages of her mother's almanac, a folded slip of paper bearing his distinctive handwriting. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the note, revealing a single sentence: "I have wed, as my family demanded. I remain yours, if your heart can forgive." She felt the world tilt, as though time itself shivered and could not stand upright. He had married the woman his family chose, an arranged match sealed by ancestral duty and dowries, but his words still found her, a faint promise that he carried her within the hidden chambers of his soul. She pressed the letter to her chest and let tears stream down her cheeks, for in that moment she realized that even sacrifice could not sever their entwined spirits. Years passed in a swirl of shifting tides. The French grip on Indochina began to dissolve in the roiling currents of unrest, and whispers of revolution crept through alleyways like stealthy shadows. She, now a young woman nearing her 21st year, felt the weight of her family's hopes shift onto her shoulders. A respectable marriage to a man of modest means, a union that promised stability in a world at war with itself. She met him, handsome, urbane, a senior officer in the colonial administration, and found in him a kind steadiness that seemed to anchor her battered heart. At first, she welcomed his quiet kindness, the way he offered his arm, the gentle ease with which she confided in him, the promise of a new life unburdened by clandestine longing. She thought she could learn to bury the past, to tuck away the scar of her former love like a photograph folded and forgotten. But even as she slipped into the fragrant layers of her bridal gown, trimmed in pale lace, she felt her spirit contract, longing for the raw ache of memory that stitched through her veins like an eternal flame. Then came the war's long winter, when Japanese forces swept into Saigon, turning the city's grand boulevards into shadows of their former selves. She and her new husband were interned in a makeshift compound, a cluster of barracks ringed by barbed wire where day became an exercise in survival and nightly curfews whispered with gunmetal intent. The huskies panting had been replaced by the clanging of guard towers and the hush of watchful eyes. In the compound's meager courtyard, she tended a small patch of thyme, coaxing green sprigs from rocky soil as though coaxing life from despair. News arrived in scraps, fragments of rumor about him, traveling clandestinely to ensure her safety, risking everything to slip into the camp's fence shadows and lay a folded letter by her foot. That letter bore his shaky handwriting: "I have not forgotten you. Our love endures beyond this world's fractures." She read those words in the dim lamplight, chest tightening, and tucked the letter into her blouse as though it were a hymn sung softly against the gathering storm. When liberation arrived at last, gunfire replaced by the rumble of jeeps and Japanese helmets surrendered to Allied hopes, she stepped out into a city transformed. The buildings bore scars of war, shattered windows, crumbling facades, and streets strewn with debris. Yet somewhere beneath the rubble, life flickered, a bud of resilience that refused to bow to ruin. She returned to her husband's side, trying to piece together a world stitched from need and memory. But the war's end could not quench her longing. On a humid morning, she found a moment to slip away from the pounding of reconstruction, slipping through narrow streets toward the riverbank they once haunted. When she reached the pagoda, she found the wooden boards weathered, the banyan trees leaning like weary sentinels. She closed her eyes and felt the city's pulse beneath her feet, its breath still heavy with war's residue. But then she saw him appear across the courtyard, older, grayer, the lines of worry etched deeper into his face. Yet in his eyes burned the same golden ember she remembered. She stood still as he crossed the space between them, each footstep echoing the ghosts of promises made beneath summer skies. She closed her eyes and felt the city's pulse beneath her feet, its breath still heavy with war's residue. But then she saw him appear across the courtyard, older, grayer, the lines of worry etched deeper into his face. Yet in his eyes burned the same golden ember she remembered. She stood still as he crossed the space between them, each footstep echoing the ghosts of promises made beneath summer skies. They met beneath the temple's shadow, where lanterns still hung like fragile hopes. He offered her a single blossom, a red hibiscus, its petals luminous against her pale dress. They spoke in hushed voices, as though the world itself might shatter if anyone overheard. He told her of his family's exile, how his wife had passed in childbirth, leaving him adrift in Canton's gilded halls. In the war's chaos, his father had perished, and the plantations had withered under neglect. He had returned to Saigon as a ghost, searching for the soft pulse of her presence to anchor him. She felt her heart unravel, each confession a tremor in the night's stillness. When he reached for her hand, she felt the river's cool cadence seep into her veins, as though time itself had tilted them back to that first kiss beneath the banyan tree. For a fragile moment, they stood on a single plane of memory and hope, each breath a prayer that this reunion might rewrite fate's harsh decree. But dawn's first light always draws new boundaries. As they sat beneath the pagoda's marble lion, a distant rumble snapped their reverie, a convoy of military jeeps bearing the insignia of the new Vietnamese government. The world they had stumbled into had shifted yet again, and their sanctuary vanished like mist. He rose to his feet, tenderly brushing hair from her face, and whispered that they would not be able to stay together. He spoke of borders and identities, of French blood and Chinese lineage, of a daughter who would one day ask why her parents could not remain one. In his voice she heard the soft crack of her own illusions. Love, no matter how fierce, could be swallowed by the gaping maw of history. She felt tears spring to her eyes as he cupped her face and kissed her once more, an echo of all that they had been and all that they could not become. When he stepped back and walked toward the hush of dawn's golden edge, she watched until his form dissolved into the city's surge, leaving her to stand alone upon the threshold of every dream she had ever dared to build. She returned to her husband's side, her gaze distant beneath the bright overhead sun, and he raised an eyebrow as though sensing her soul had hollowed. She smiled politely, though her heart roamed the riverbanks, yearning for a man who no longer belonged to any home but the ghost of memory. In time, she bore a child, a daughter with dark eyes that sparkled like the river at sunrise, and she wrapped that new life in as many silken hopes as she could summon. Yet sometimes, late at night, when the child's breath slowed to a hush and the city's pulse faded to a distant murmur, she slipped from her bedroom to the balcony and stared at the patterns of lantern light flickering on rippling water. In those moments she felt a hand brush her heart in a familiar pattern, a tap of devotion she knew could never die. Though she had learned to live with the ache of absence, it remained a quiet companion that shaped every sigh and every tremor of longing that drifted through her veins. Years later, when news came that he had died, found floating in the Mekong, a single bullet in his chest. She felt a soft hollow open in her chest. The world tilted again, as though the cosmos had held its breath and now exhaled a grief too vast for words. She journeyed to the riverbank one last time, trudging through mists that clung like ancient regrets. His funeral pyre flickered upon the water's surface, a single ember drifting beneath the moon's shy gaze. She placed a strand of her daughter's kelp-green ribbon among the embers, a final promise that love's flame endures beyond death's silent claim. As the river carried his memory into the night's embrace, she felt the wind's soft caress against her cheek, as though his presence lingered in every ripple. In that final scene, she understood that their love had defied all boundaries, of age, of class, of geography, and endured as a story carved into the river's flowing heart. As dawn's first blush touched the horizon, she turned away, a woman shaped by desire, sacrifice, and the steadfast pulse of a love that refused to die. Her name is Lean, and in the soft hush of dawn, when the first tendrils of sunlight tiptoe across Saigon's rooftops, she rises with a quiet deliberation that suggests both duty and burgeoning awareness. At 17, her body carries the supple promise of youth, skin kissed by the monsoon heat, hair dark as onyx falling in a single curtain down her back. Yet in her eyes flickers something more complex, a stained-glass window of longing, fear, and defiance, all wreathed in the innocence of adolescence. She moves through her family's cramped home like a silent tide, brushing past the chipped porcelain figurines of her ancestors and the low language of whispered prayers that clings to the lacquered walls. In that fragile space, she learns the art of measurement, how to bend her spirit around the dictates of propriety and poverty without fracturing. But beneath every measured step, beneath the obedient bow of her head before her mother's instructions, a fierce question coils within her. Is the life I have been given the only life I deserve? Her childhood was a series of tight corridors and narrow lanes, where the rickshaws rattled like clockwork and the vendors' calls rose in a distant symphony. She excelled in her French lycée, her mind a sponge for languages, her tongue supple enough to slide into English with an ease that startled her teachers. Yet in the confines of the classroom, whitewashed walls, chalk dust motes dancing in sunbeams, she felt a tension, as though her heart beat to a different rhythm. Outside, the world was a tapestry of rickshaw bells, sampan oars, and jasmine-scented alleys. Inside, she was taught to be measured, to tuck her dreams into a trunk for later, when time and convention permitted. In that hush between expectation and desire, she learned to cloak her heart in polite composure, even as storm clouds of yearning roiled within. When she met him, the wealthy Chinese planter whose linen shirt caught the light like a shard of pearl, something within her shifted. In the first encounter, by the river's edge where the water glinted like liquid jade, she felt the world tilt on its axis. He stood tall, shoulders squared beneath the colonial shimmer of Saigon, and when their eyes met, she felt a current surge through her veins, a sharp electric promise that everything could change. To him, she was a study in contrasts, a waif of pale white cotton skirts against the scarlet tang of sunset, a schoolgirl's disciplined poise softened by lips that seemed made for secrets. He greeted her in faltering French, his voice a mixture of cultivated elegance and raw fascination. From the first syllable, she knew she would never slip back into the shape of the girl she had been. His presence carved a hollow within her chest, a space filled by the anticipatory thrum of heartbeats she had no name for. He awakened her to desire's first taste, a faint spice on her tongue that taught her lips how to curve into forbidden smiles. In the hush of their stolen mornings, beneath scrolling banyan trees, where beams of sunlight pierced the humidity. When she met him, the wealthy Chinese planter whose linen shirt caught the light like a shard of pearl, something within her shifted. In the first encounter, by the river's edge where the water glinted like liquid jade, she felt the world tilt on its axis. He stood tall, shoulders squared beneath the colonial shimmer of Saigon, and when their eyes met, she felt a current surge through her veins, a sharp electric promise that everything could change. To him, she was a study in contrasts, a waif of pale white cotton skirts against the scarlet tang of sunset, a schoolgirl's disciplined poise softened by lips that seemed made for secrets. He greeted her in faltering French, his voice a mixture of cultivated elegance and raw fascination. From the first syllable, she knew she would never slip back into the shape of the girl she had been. His presence carved a hollow within her chest, a space filled by the anticipatory thrum of heartbeats she had no name for. He awakened her to desire's first taste, a faint spice on her tongue that taught her lips how to curve into forbidden smiles. In the hush of their stolen mornings, beneath scrolling banyan trees, where beams of sunlight pierced the humidity, she discovered the tenderness of his attentions. He brought gifts he claimed were from Paris, a swath of silk so soft it felt like breathing, a gold necklace threaded with pearls that glowed like captured moonlight. When he wrapped the silk around her shoulders, her skin felt the faint caress of worlds she could only imagine. Dance halls aglow with crystal chandeliers, cafes fragrant with coffee and chanson. Each gift was an invitation to step beyond the boundaries of her life, to reimagine herself as someone who might command the gaze of the world. But in her delight, she sensed a tether to reality, that for all the shimmer of his promises, she was the daughter of a poor family bound by tradition's iron chains. Her parents, pillars of stern resolve, saw in her transformation a worry that twisted their hearts. To them, she was a repository of their lineage's fragility, a daughter whose marriage would mean both honor and survival. Her father, the hard-faced patriarch with calloused hands and a gaze as disciplined as a blacksmith's steel, insisted that a woman's duty lay in the hearth and the head of her children. Yet her mother, whose hands bore the stain of labored days spent plucking fowl and coaxing broth from thin rice, understood the hunger in her daughter's eyes, the hunger that could never be sated by bowls of stale rice or prayers to ancestors. In her mother's quiet, urgent glances, Lean felt both a fortress of love and the weight of expectation pressing her toward a destiny she feared would devour her soul. In that crucible of love and duty, she wrestled with her own burgeoning self. Each night, in the solitude of her bedroom lit by a single oil lamp, she traced the silhouette of his letters, folded slips of paper scented with his cologne, each word a flicker of hope. He wrote of Canton's alabaster palaces, its jade-hued canals, and the silk-laden bazaars where merchants hawked spices exotic enough to steal her breath away. He told her of the pressure that bore upon him, the weight of family honor, the demands of an arranged marriage that would cement his lineage's fortunes. In every line, she sensed his struggle, a man caught between familial duty and the fierce joy she brought him. To read his letters was to open a window onto a world shaped by policies and power, where love was a tremulous reed swaying in the gale. In her chest, each syllable felt like a tremor, a starbeam that burned too bright, too swiftly, even as it captivated her soul. As rice bowls emptied and sutra chants rose from the painted altar, she tiptoed through her days, a creature strung across two worlds, the one that bound her to her family's needs and the one that whispered her name in the hush of early dawn. At school, she recited her lessons in French, every conjugation a thread in the fabric of her discipline. But when the bell rang and she stepped into the hot press of the tram, her mind soared to that single line of riverbank where he stood waiting, clad in linen and sunlight, as though the heavens had deigned to place a constellation before her eyes. She pressed her palm to the cool metal rail, as though it could ground her in a life that felt increasingly distant. And when she returned home, she sought the privacy of the latrine, clutching his letters to her chest, as though their words could shield her from the dull ache that pulsed beneath her ribs. He, too, carried contradictions within him, an opulent man bound by rigid expectations. In the chambers of his family's Canton manor, he was heir to endless rubber plantations, a scion expected to marry someone of suitable lineage and wealth. Yet in her presence, all that faded like a half-remembered dream. She awakened in him a sense of wild abandon, a momentary breach in the velvet walls of his gilded cage. He learned to slip across Saigon's labyrinth of canals just to glimpse her silhouette beneath the banyan trees, each beating or echoing the private music of his heart. When he stood before her, his crisp linen clung to skin tempered by the tropic sun, and he felt both the fervor of love and the anchor of duty. In the hush between them, he was at once a pillar of wealth and an orphan of choice, haunted by the knowledge that his destiny was scripted by others long before his heart had learned to beat. In the glow of their clandestine love, they created a fragile garden, a secret world where the incense of desire burned unabated. Yet beneath every touch lay the darkness of consequences they dared not name. He was warned by French associates who viewed his liaison as a breach of propriety, an exotic dalliance that lent an air of risque indulgence to their salons. When he attempted to argue the authenticity of their devotion, they dismissed him with a careless wave, a rich man's folly. Their words stung like acid, each syllable a reminder of the gulf that yawned between hearts and pockets. And when the first hint of scandal drifted into his family's ears, whispers of the planter's obsession with a mere schoolgirl, he felt the walls of his world tremble. In that moment, he should have withdrawn, should have retreated back into the stifling safety his family had woven for him. But he could not tear his gaze from her. She discovered their love's fragility in the moment she realized she carried his child. When the faint line appeared in the porcelain cup, she saw her life compress into a single breathless second. Her future stood before her like two paths, one leading to a village shunned by scandal, the other into the realm of painful sacrifice he would demand. The moment of that discovery felt like a fissure splitting her bones, her body a battlefield where shame and fear waged war. By the time she heard of his marriage, to the woman selected by his father, she had already surrendered half her existence to him. In her chest, his absence raged like the storm that battered the city's rooftops, and she understood at once that some loves, however brilliant, are condemned to burn too quickly, leaving only ashes in their wake. His own transformation unfolded in shadows of regret and longing. After he wed the woman of his family's design, someone whose name he barely knew, he found himself wandering Canton's marble hallways like a lost spirit. The trappings of his inheritance, the jade carvings, the gilt vases, felt hollow without her laughter to fill their emptiness. At night, he slipped away to study law and business amendments that might secure his family's plantations from the mayhem of war, yet in each word he read, he heard her voice beckoning him toward a freedom he would never reclaim. He wrote to her, letters folded with the careful fervor of a confession, each a testament to his enduring devotion. Yet as war swept across Indochina, his words grew desperate, punctuated by fear that she would be consigned to oblivion without him. When news arrived that she had been interned, he defied propriety once more, traveling under the cover of night to find her. He slipped a note through the compound's barbed wire, an echo of pirated longing, watching from the edges as she read his words beneath the candle's flicker. In that instant, he saw the girl he had first loved, now grown into a woman bound by scars, but still glimmering with resilient hope. Lean's transformation in those internment days was no less profound. When the Japanese occupied Saigon, she and her new husband, a man chosen for her by family, a gentle soul whose eyes mirrored the river's calm, found themselves confined within barbed wire camps. In that bleak expanse, the world constricted to the hovel's iron walls, she learned the stark grit of survival. Each day, she coaxed life from a patch of sun-baked earth, her fingers caked with dirt as she cultivated herbs for meager soups. She bore the aches of hunger, the chill of makeshift barracks, and the daily ritual of guards' footsteps tramping across taut silence. Yet in that crucible, her spirit grew as a lotus blooms in mud, each petal an affirmation that life endures beyond ruin's face. In whispered moments beneath starlit skies, she learned to press letters to her heart, letters he risked sending, each a lifeline threaded with hope. Through the blur of war's horrors, she emerged as a woman forged by pain, her soul tempered by the heat of sacrifice. When Saigon breathed again under the sigh of liberation, she found herself transformed. The brightness of the sun felt too stark against the city's new scars. Crumbling facades bore witness to the ravages she had witnessed. In the quiet of her borrowed linen sari, silver threads glinting like hope against midnight, she ventured once more to the riverbank. There, she found him waiting beneath the temple's aged pillars, his face drawn with both grief and joy. He presented her with a single red hibiscus, the final bloom of his devotion, and in that embrace she felt time's wounds knit together in a single exhalation. Their reunion was a tender bell tolling in the hush, proof that love, once ignited, cannot be fully destroyed by any force but death. Then, when his body drifted down the Mekong with a bullet in his chest, she felt an old sorrow rise like a storm-racked tide. At his funeral pyre, the river consumed his ashes, each ember a fragment of the world they once dared to build. Her silence in that moment was a language unto itself, an elegy for a love that transcended social binds, a love strong enough to defy the gales of war and custom, yet vulnerable to the final reckoning of human frailty. When she released that hibiscus into the river's flow, her tears mingled with the Mekong's currents, as though she offered her own heart as a sacrifice to the depths of longing. Her journey did not end with grief but opened onto a new horizon, life as a mother, a teacher, a woman whose heart carried the echoes of every sacrifice she had made. She cradled her daughter beneath the same banyan trees where she once first brushed fingertips with the man she loved. In her daughter's bright eyes she glimpsed the promise of new beginnings, an echo of the river that surged through their lives, ever-changing, always seeking the sea. Yet in the hush of every lullaby she sang, she felt his presence, a shadow in the light, a foothold beneath the tide. In quiet moments, as incense drifted from temple altars and lantern light gilded her home, she would press her hand to her heart, tracing the faint silhouette of a scar that carried the shape of his name. Thus, her life became a tapestry of memory and resilience. The girl who once navigated Saigon's alleys with a heart too large for her world, the woman who bore the weight of love's finest flame and learned its cruelest edge. In her daughter's laughter, and in the quiet bloom of the red hibiscus each spring, she found a testament that love transcends even the sharpest sorrow. In each breath, she carried the memory of him, a luminous shard that remained lodged in her soul, a reminder that in sacrifice and longing, we carve the contours of who we become. And in that living mosaic she stands, neither wholly burdened by her past nor blinded by her losses, but a woman whose heart learned to hold both grief and grace in a single, unbreakable beat. Before the first camera light flickered over the dusty Saigon streets in the swelter of 1991, there existed a quiet hum of anticipation that pulsed through every dusty alley and colonial porch. The production team for The Lover, adapted from Marguerite Duras's famously erotic novel, arrived via clattering little twin-engined prop planes, each landing at dawn on makeshift airstrips ringed by coconut palms. Rumors drifted among the crew that the city's spirit was already restless, as though it sensed the film would stir whispers long after the cameras rolled. In truth, the almost mythical tension that would come to be associated with the production had quietly begun before Jane March, the untested British newcomer cast as the 17-year-old French schoolgirl, first set foot on Vietnamese soil. Each step onto the red earth carried an undercurrent of trepidation and possibility, as though the entire ensemble was about to unlock a story condemned both by language and by the quiet rules of cultural propriety. Costume design, too, became a crucible for oddities. Pamela Paul, the film's costume designer, meticulously sourced fabrics from Hoi and silk so shimmering it seemed to catch a sliver of dawn in each thread. She ordered bolt after bolt shipped by courier to Saigon, only to discover that each package emerged from customs with a layer of dust that required days of cleaning. One day, the shipment of 20-meter rolls of pale green silk arrived, destined for the lovers' linen shirts, and bureaucrats insisted on opening every roll to inspect for contraband. By the time the material reached the silent courtyard where seamstresses worked, it had wilted under the midday sun and lost half its radiant sheen. To restore its glow, Pamela had to repeatedly rinse the silk in cold river water, each dunk followed by gentle wringing and multiple rounds of air-drying beneath sunlit rafters. She later confessed that the silk emerged lighter and more translucent than she had ever seen, its final color more moonbeam than mint leaf. The suits fashioned from that silk shimmered on screen in ways that defied description, as though Ovidian gods had draped their children in fabrics woven from moonlight. Jane March's own transformation into the film's young protagonist became a tale of its own. At 15, she was barely old enough to consent to the film's notoriously steamy sequences. Annaud demanded that the crew be minimal, only a handful of trusted technicians permitted on the set whenever intimate scenes were shot. He even banned the casting director, believing that a shy female presence with no stake in the actor's comfort would keep her safe. Jane's mother accompanied her to the set each day, watching from a discreetly placed folding chair behind miniature screens draped in dark cloth. In the evening, a hush fell over the crew as Annaud, himself a strict taskmaster, coached the scene from behind the camera. No lingering camera angle beyond the specific choreography, no stray eyes wandering. Yet when the film's erotic triangle unfolded on screen, a gaze, a brush of silk, lips touching in a cavern of moonlight, viewers described a raw, almost jarring authenticity. Jane later said she spent hours after each take scrubbing off the dust and sweat, only to find remnants in places shaped by tension and breath. Her parents took to sending her to private herbal baths each night, where the water was scented with jasmine and camphor to soothe the film's physical aftermath. In one scene, where the lover's boat drifts amid a moonlit lotus pond, neither actor nor crew suspected that the set's little group of lotus pots, chosen for their pastel blooms, would turn on them. As the camera panned closer, dozens of small frogs, stowed in the foliage by local animal wranglers to evoke a sense of authenticity, leaped into the water beneath the actor's silent world. The resulting croak chorus drowned out the gentle lapping of watercraft, and Annaud, enraged, bellowed for retakes until the wranglers eventually admitted they had underestimated the frogs' acrobatic tendencies. The frogs were caught, and every leaf and blossom was inspected for hidden jumpers, yet as filming resumed, the chorus returned, each frog bolder than the last. The crew, at wit's end, rigged tiny nets beneath the lily pads during breaks, capturing up to 20 frogs per take. The frogs were then gently released downstream, where the director joked they would haunt another film in time. When the final cut appeared, attentive viewers reported that a few ghostly rib bits still managed to weave into the hush of night, as though the frogs insisted on leaving their own spectral mark upon the narrative. The score by Gabriel Yared became another source of fascination. When Yared arrived in Saigon, he carried only a battered accordion and a dog-eared notebook filled with musical motifs. He wandered through the city's streets at dawn, listening to street musicians playing on rusted guitars, to vendors pounding rice into dough, to Buddhist chants drifting from pagodas. Each sound he gathered he notated, as though building a mosaic from fragments of breath and noise. He recorded cymbals played on brass bowls rescued from a temple's courtyard, and asked local children to play a pentatonic scale on bamboo flutes fashioned from discarded water pipes. When he returned to Paris to compose in his studio, he faced the challenge of merging these guerrilla recordings with orchestral strings and a single piano. The result was a score that felt haunted by the city's spirit, staccato rhythms mimicking the clattering of motorbikes, mournful cello passages echoing the Mekong's ebb, and a solo violin's wail rising like a siren across the screen. In early test screenings, audiences reported goosebumps during key sequences, the boat drifting at night, the lovers' final embrace, where the score seemed to breathe with its own consciousness, as though Yared had captured more than music. The film's very soul-casting extras brought its own odd anecdotes. Annaud insisted on locals to play Saigon's crowded marketplaces, to capture both the geometry of colonial life and the fluid chaos of a city in flux. So each morning, dozens of vendors, fishermen, and small-time artisans lined up to become extras, drawn by the promise of a few dollars and the chance at a fleeting brush with cinematic immortality. When the call went out, Ramadan was just beginning, and many Muslim vendors hesitated about spending their days under the midday sun without food or water. The producers solved the problem by quietly distributing small bowls of dates and water to extras, allowing them to break their fast in private and then return to their marks without disrupting the shoot. This small gesture earned the crew a grateful loyalty. Vendors who would go the extra mile, repositioning their baskets of mangoes and jasmine-scented ribbons at just the right camera angle, as though crafting a living tapestry. In gratitude, some of the extras formed their own fan club, sending the director framed portraits of their families with smiles that rippled across every photograph, testaments to the unexpected bonds forged during filming. The film's climactic burn scene, where the lover's ancestral house, bred from the original novel's plantation residences, goes up in flames, became a locus of nearly supernatural oddities. To achieve the effect of a gradual inferno that crept through teakwood walls, special effects coordinators rigged the set with hidden propane lines, each controlled remotely to ignite in staggered sequences. Early tests went horribly awry when a single valve malfunctioned, sending a wall of fire roaring through the set in seconds, scorching the siding in unnatural patterns and sending heat radiating like a wave of invisible lava. The test was cut before anyone could yell, "Cut!" and the entire crew found themselves sprinting through the courtyard in a panic, firefighters summoned from the local station arriving with hoses that snaked across the dirt like silver snakes. Miraculously, no one was injured, but the charred timbers remained, a skeletal monument to both hubris and luck. The director, refusing to be cowed, insisted on rebuilding the set from scratch, this time under a permit that mandated 2 backup safety crews at every conceivable vantage point. When the scene finally emerged in the film, it unfolded as a slow, breathtaking burn, flames licking the roof as the camera closed on the lovers' distraught faces. Aine March arrived in Saigon on a humid afternoon, her cheeks still youth-pink from a life lived under grey British skies. She had never before experienced heat so intense that her breath fatigued at each step, nor humidity so pervasive that it felt as though the very air clung to her skin. When the makeup artists first attempted to apply her translucent powder, it melted almost immediately under the circling whir of handheld fans. One crew member, a veteran of tropical shoots, remarked that she looked as though she had materialized from the mist, a ghost from another continent come to haunt the ancient French colonial outpost. In the brief taxi ride to the hotel, she was warned by the driver that the monsoon rains could arrive without notice, bringing the city to its knees for days. Indeed, as soon as she stepped into her room, a modest suite in a faded Art Deco building, the sky opened, sending sheets of torrential rain bouncing off tin rooftops with a ferocity that sounded like artillery fire. She watched from the window as helpless pedestrians sprinted for cover beneath plastic tarps, realizing in that trembling moment that the rhythm of life here pulsed to an entirely different drumbeat than in London. Jean-Jacques Annaud, the director, was already on set, overseeing the construction of a sprawling outdoor set meant to recreate the Saigon of the late 1920s. What appeared to be a single dusty street took weeks to assemble. Under the dying light of a low sun, carpenters hammered together wooden frames, painters applied faded pastels to peeling shutters, and wardrobe designers hung silk cheongsams and crisp white linen shirts on makeshift racks. One painter, perched precariously on a thin scaffold, painted a single shutter the wrong shade of rust. Annaud, viewing the error from behind his camera, barked orders that sent the crew scrambling like startled birds. In truth, every element had to evoke a world long vanished, yet still haunted by countless rumors. French colonial officers, Chinese businessmen, and Vietnamese artisans all crossing paths in a crowded alley. Annaud insisted on authenticity. If a single rickety sign swung the wrong way, or a discarded coconut husk lay in the wrong place, the illusion would collapse. The rumor spread that he had once sent an entire shipment of hand-picked clay roof tiles back to Singapore because they lacked the correct shade of ochre. Casting the male lead, the wealthy Chinese lover, brought its own cache of curiosities. Gérard Depardieu, originally considered, balked at the prospect, fearing language barriers and cultural missteps. Eventually, the team settled on an actor of mixed Chinese and Vietnamese descent who had grown up in France, actor François Beaulieu. Though fluent in French, he had to learn conversations in Vietnamese between takes, a feat made all the more difficult by a local dialect that bent words into sounds foreign even to other Vietnamese speakers. His Vietnamese coach, a gregarious man named Tran, followed him everywhere, holding small cards with translations and idioms scrawled hastily on coffee-stained paper. One day, Tran found Beaulieu struggling with the phrase, "On Noam, I miss you," unable to get the subtle rise in intonation correct. So Tran climbed atop a crate in the middle of the set and began shouting it at the tops of his lungs to the surrounding crew, each syllable exaggerated until the phrase lodged in Beaulieu's memory like a singing insect. When the camera rolled that evening, Beaulieu delivered the line so perfectly it prompted the entire crowd to hush, as though he had conjured the very soul of the language from his lips. Meanwhile, the author of the original novel, Marguerite Duras, remained a shadowy presence, an icon whose sultry prose had terrified French censors just a few years earlier. Though she did not attend the shoot, her name hung in the air like a half-whispered secret, and every creak of the wooden set seemed to carry her spectral influence. The production designers carried dog-eared paperbacks of her book on location, flipping through passages as though they were incantations to guide the unfolding scenes. One of the cinematographers, Robert Fraisse, admitted later that he would blink rapidly after reading a particularly charged chapter, tracing the memory of its feverish heat through his lens. He even worked out a system of colored filters, amber for twilight scenes, pale green for moonlit exteriors, that mirrored Duras's vivid descriptions of tropical humidity and nocturnal longing. Annaud warned that any deviation from the novel's mood would blur the line between adaptation and betrayal, so a hush fell each time a line was cut or dialogue rephrased. It was as though sacred text hovered just off-screen, demanding reverence. Rainstorms dictated the shoot schedule with an almost mystical force. A single day of iron-gray clouds could send the entire production into a frenzy. When the monsoon rains arrived, the artificial riverbanks that had taken weeks to sculpt washed away in a single hour, and the rice paddies that had been carved into the set flooded so deeply that actors waded through waist-high water to reach their marks. One memorable storm began just as the crew was filming a nighttime scene. As the director called action, the heavens opened with a downpour so violent that equipment almost floated away. The sound crew scrambled to secure their microphones, covering them with plastic bags and duct tape. At one point, a boom pole slipped from its grip, spinning like a whirling baton in the deluge. Actors struggled to maintain composure as torrents roared around them, vows of passion ringing hollow above the thunder. The lights went out, plunging the set into near blackness, until diesel generators roared back to life, their sputtering engines drenching the scene in staccato bursts of light. It was captured on film, an accidental collage of rain, thunder, and raw emotion. In post-production, Annaud insisted on keeping much of that footage, rejecting the temptation to shoot the same scene in controlled conditions. He believed that the storm's savagery lent the film a realism no staged reenactment could match. Food emerged as another unexpected challenge. The catering truck, meant to ferry meals for 100 extras, frequently ran out of basic staples, rice, chicken, vegetables, by midday. To solve this, the production hired a local chef named Mrs. Nguyen, whose tiny roadside stall had become legendary for its faux beau and salty green papaya salad. She arrived each morning dragging pots that could feed an army, vats of lemongrass broth, mountains of fresh herbs, and bowls of thinly sliced onions that glowed like embers. Yet even she struggled to keep pace with a crew whose demands were voracious. Once, a dozen extras fell ill after eating spring rolls that had been inhaled with such haste they were accidentally prepared without vinegar. When the crew returned the uneaten plates, they found the pans empty, apparently eaten by local dogs who rooted through the trash. The rumor circulated that those same dogs were cultured enough to taste ginger before turning away, a claim made tongue-in-cheek but each time repeated as if myth had claimed the edge of reality. By the end of the shoot, the catering budget had doubled, and no one dared question why. Everyone simply accepted that in Saigon's embrace, a hearty bowl of noodle soup was worth any price. Costume design, too, became a crucible for oddities. Pamela Paul, the film's costume designer, meticulously sourced fabrics from Hoi. Miraculously, no one was injured, but the charred timbers remained, a skeletal monument to both hubris and luck. The director, refusing to be cowed, insisted on rebuilding the set from scratch, this time under a permit that mandated 2 backup safety crews at every conceivable vantage point. When the scene finally emerged in the film, it unfolded as a slow, breathtaking burn, flames licking the roof as the camera closed on the lovers' distraught faces, and behind them, the ancient rafters collapsing into a sky streaked by smoke. Extras later confessed they had collectively held their breath as each lantern dimmed in the night, fearing the fire might not relent. When it finally dwindled, they whispered aloud, as though a mythic beast had been vanquished at last. When the film premiered at Cannes in May 1992, its opening sequence, Jane March emerging from a steamy Mekong tributary, her wet hair plastered to her face, elicited a mixture of gasps and stunned silence. Critics dissected the scene, debating whether the waters had been dyed or if a fog machine had added its mist. In truth, the water had been drawn fresh each morning from the river by a local boatman named Bao, who insisted on using only the clearest tributary, an elbow bend upstream where water flowed steadily, avoiding stagnant pools. He refused the production's offer of thousands of dong to use a more accessible location. "The river's soul lies there," he explained in halting French. "Here, the water is honest." So on the morning of the shoot, a crew of bamboo rafts ferried camera equipment upriver, skirting lotus beds and gullies until they reached Bao's chosen spot. It was only when the audience shouted as though they had glimpsed the river's true heart, smoke drifting on the horizon, cicadas roaring in a crescendo, that they realized the scene was, in every fiber, a testament to authenticity. As Jane March emerged, her skin glinting with droplets of living water, a ripple of applause rose, an acknowledgment that the river, in all its mystery, had become an unspoken character. Throughout the festival, rumors swirled of behind-the-scenes romances and rivalries that mirrored the film's own themes of forbidden love. One story involved a local cameraman, Min, who was said to have fallen quietly in love with Jane March during the shoot. He would linger by her trailer on the nights when the moon seemed too full, pressing small paper match cards folded into delicate cranes, tokens of Japanese tradition meaning hope, beneath her door. She was said to respond with a single nod in the morning, having discovered one of the tiny cranes when she climbed into bed. No one can say whether these rumors were true, yet Min's face, flickering in a brief close-up on the closing credits, bears a quiet sadness, as though he carried more than his share of heartbreak across every reel of film. Long after the cameras were packed away, villagers whispered that they would sometimes see a lone figure standing by the river at dusk, releasing paper cranes into the current, each one bearing a dream dangling between devotion and loss. Even the film's marketing spawned its own curiosities. Instead of a flashy poster, the studio commissioned a single black-and-white photograph. Jane March's silhouette backlit by a collapsing colonial facade, ripples in water at her feet reflecting a fractured moon. Typeface was kept minimal, the film's title emblazoned in a slender serif that suggested the elegance of Parisian boulevards. Ad agencies marveled that a teaser trailer, consisting of just 20 seconds of the opening river scene and a lingering shot of the silk scarf tangling in her hair, could generate overnight buzz. Across Europe and Asia, moviegoers debated whether they could watch a film so steeped in taboo, and yet festivals clamored to view it. Whispered screenings in Venice and Belgrade, small perks for serious cinephiles. Box office records fell in unexpected markets, including Tokyo and Madrid, where the film's title was translated as The Seduction on the Water's Edge, a phrase that conjured both intrigue and moral dissonance. Distributors believed they had a formula for success, a whisper of scandal, a dash of forbidden romance, and a setting exotic enough to spark the imagination. But perhaps the strangest fact of all was the film's most enduring legacy among the villagers who had participated as extras. Long after production wrapped, when the city's scaffolding was dismantled and the alleys returned to their daily rhythm, those same villagers found themselves recasting the movie in small, vivid reenactments. Each year at the Rice Harvest Festival, a makeshift wooden bridge would cross a quiet canal, once the scene of artificial riverbanks, and local dancers would perform a stylized version of the lovers' final embrace, their movements mimicking the intimate choreography that had unfolded under Annaud's directing eye. Children would don borrowed kimonos and British school uniforms, weaving through crowds as if navigating Saigon's crowded streets. Elders would sit in the shade beneath tamarind trees, sipping tea as they recalled the day they were filmed, stories embellished with each retelling. How the director insisted on perfect lighting for a single close-up, how the camerawoman's lens trembled as she captured Jane's heated confession, how the frog chorus sabotaged the lotus pond scene. These stories took on the cadence of a shared mythology, binding generations to the film's memory as if it had been a turning point in their own lives. By the time The Lover closed its theatrical run, it had become more than a film. It was an electric spark in the cultural fabric of every region it touched. The controversy over casting a minor in an erotic role spurred new conversations about censorship and morality in cinema. In France, lawmakers revisited legislation on age consent, citing the film as a touchstone for modern debates. At Paris's National Library, researchers catalogued every scrap of marginalia, diagrams of colonial set design, notes on fabric swatches, interviews with extras, creating an archive so exhaustive that some quipped it could fill an entire library wing. Jane March, thrust into international stardom at 15, became a figure of fascination. Tabloids speculated on her private life, her return to England under anonymity, and her later struggles to find roles that did not reduce her to that singular performance. She grew into a woman keen to distance herself from the shadow of her own debut, yet she could never fully escape the film's long, echoing reverberations in her personal narrative. In 2002, when the film was finally digitized and re-released in restored form, Younger audiences flocked to discover what all the fuss had been about. They found a movie that clung to its era with deliberate intimacy. The lamplit rooms that seemed to breathe with the collective hush of 1,000 hidden secrets, the lovers' dialogue floating like smoke in the sweltering air, and the Mekong River's aqueous mirror reflecting every flicker of longing. Some marveled at the film's daring, apologizing for nothing as its steamy intensity hovered between art and provocation. Others grimaced at the dated notion of colonial romance, the uneven gender dynamics, and the bygone suffrage of silks that now seemed more stage than substance. Yet few could deny its mysterious otherworldly pull, a testament to the countless strange facts woven into its making. Each credit rolled not as an ending but an invitation to ponder the unforeseen alchemy that ignites whenever art collides with life on the banks of a tropical river. And so, years later, when one sifts through the detritus of cinema history, stacks of faded Polaroids, crates of dusty script pages, and tins of unedited footage, the strangest fact about this film remains its ability to transform every sleepy marketplace, every sleepy memory, and every solitary beach at dusk into something incandescent. Its behind-the-scenes legends continue to hum like a dim undercurrent, Annaud's maniacal perfectionism, the furious storms that washed away entire sets, the silk that shimmered too brightly, the frogs that refused to remain voiceless. Each oddity wove itself into a story that now belongs as much to the local vendor in Saigon, frantically adjusting his produce for a single camera angle, as it does to the hushed theaters of Europe where critics argued over the moral calculus of the lover's illicit embrace. Even now, when the world has changed and tropical heat is met by climate's slow shift, the film's strange facts remain alive, lodged in the memory of every riverbank they touched, echoing in every hush when lovers meet in the dark, and whispering to anyone who dares to ask what truly transpires when cameras roll in the presence of thunder, silk, and desire. In the hush of Saigon's humid dusk, as lanterns flickered along the canal and dragonflies flitted through the amber glow, the film opens with a single shot of a riverbank that seems alive with possibility. Spiced moonlight glints on rippling water as a young schoolgirl steps from the shadows, her pale skirts trailing in mud. There is an immediate sense that the world she inhabits is charged with silent tensions, a colonial city of whispered hierarchies, of French officers in crisp uniforms juxtaposed against Vietnamese peasants tending muddy fields. The setting itself becomes a character, a living testament to the clash of worlds that undergirds the narrative. In those opening frames, viewers sense that this is no casual romance but a collision of desires and social codes, a moment that forces honest reflection on power and vulnerability. As the young woman's bare feet sink into the river's edge, the camera drifts toward a sleek boat waiting in the shallows. Its owner, a Chinese businessman bound by his own burdens, stands tall and inscrutable, watching her approach. Critically, this first meeting has been analyzed as a masterstroke of visual subtext. The camera's languid glide implies that each breath of foggy air between them is more than mere chemistry. It is an electric current that bridges continents and classes. Critics have applauded how the mise-en-scene so effortlessly encapsulates the wider world of 1920s Indochina, and yet it is the intimacy of that midnight rendezvous that sets the tone for a film unafraid to explore the unspoken limits of colonial desire. As the camera lingers on their hands touching for the first time, her skin trembling against his warm palm, viewers are drawn into a hush of longing that refuses easy categorization. Here, critics note, grass grows heavy with sweat and ink-dark uncertainty. She is a mere schoolgirl pressed by family duty, while he is a planter whose rubber estates support his genteel facade. Their union in the moonlit boat becomes a kind of defiance, a declaration that human longing can transgress social strictures. The pulsing notes of the score underscore each breathless exchange, smooth cello lines that rise like a promise in the night air. Scholars of film have often returned to this scene as a case study in how eroticism can be conveyed without explicit detail. Annaud's camera chooses the curve of her neck, the tension of his jaw, and allows sound design to amplify the thunder of her heartbeat. Audiences, caught in that electric moment, experience desire not as a spectacle but as a primal force, an unspoken language learned by two hearts beating out of sync with the colonial rhythm. The impact of this opening is profound. As critics widely observed, it leaves viewers breathless, caught between fascination and unease, acutely aware that what they have witnessed is both beautiful and transgressive. Moments later, When rain falls in thick sheets, soaking the lovers into trembling silhouettes, the scene becomes a test of emotion and patience, not merely a cinematic device to heighten drama. The monsoon's thrumming taps on wooden roofs seem to echo the frantic beats of their hearts, and as they cling to one another for warmth, each drop of water falls like a baptism of bravery. One critical perspective holds that the storm underscores the vulnerability of their affair, reminding viewers that love in a colonial world is as fragile as a lotus petal battered by the tide. The muted palette of grays and browns, filtered through sheets of rain, evokes the narrow passages of their secret rendezvous, suggesting that every touch is stolen in defiance of a world bristling with expectations. Reviews from the time noted that this sequence blurred the line between beauty and danger, conveying a raw sincerity that resonated even among those who questioned the morality of the relationship. By immersing the audience in the oppressive heat and relentless rain, Annaud not only dramatizes the lovers' intimacy but also casts a stark light on their precarious standing. Two silhouettes swallowed by the storm, neither wholly protected nor entirely abandoned. In quieter moments, the film shifts to the young woman's schoolroom, a stark, sunlit canvas of blackboards and wooden desks. There, as she recites lessons in French, the camera lingers on her expression, eyes cast downward, lips parted as though tasting a secret she cannot share. Critics have highlighted this interplay of education and innocence as a key thematic undercurrent. She is enmeshed in a French curriculum that prizes civility and order, while her heart pulses with a desire that defies every lesson of propriety. The contrast between her immaculate uniform and the underground currents of her yearning has drawn comparisons to classic literature in which the private life of the heart disrupts the public facade of respectability. The implication is that in a colonial school built on rigid structures, her emotions operate as a subversive force, one that emerges in furtive glances and disciplined posture, a rebellion contained only by the hushed walls of the classroom. Critics point out that scenes set within these academic confines underscore how colonial education can indoctrinate yet fail to extinguish the wild stirrings of adolescence. By emphasizing her silent gaze,